learn more about ongoing challenges in terms of security and health and development, but also to celebrate the opportunities, the entrepreneurship, the energy of many sectors in Nigeria.
Well, the scourge of terrorism globally has given rise to the need for the international community to come together and fight the menace and to protect the right to life of citizens. This formed the basis of the meeting between the Senate President Bukola Saraki and a delegation of the United States legislators led by Senator Christopher Coons.
To be a new chapter that we're opening where the U.S. government will now be ready to sell arms to Nigeria, and that will help us strengthen our men and women in the fight against terrorism, in surveillance, in intelligence, and this kind of area.
The ECOWAS Parliament is to send a delegation to Sierra Leone to commiserate with the government and people of the country over the mudslide which claimed hundreds of lives. Speaker of the Parliament, Mustafa Siselo, said this while declaring open an extraordinary session of the institution in Lome. Oseloka Obaze has emerged the standard bearer of the People's Democratic Party (PDP) for the November 18th Anambra governorship election. The former diplomat and secretary to the Anambra state government garnered 672 votes to beat his closest rival, Dr. Alex Obiagbolu, who polled 190 votes.
Governor of the State, and the Chief Returning Officer for this primary hereby declare Obaze Oseloka Henry, who having scored lawful votes of 672, the winner of this PDP primary and is hereby known as the candidate of the party.
Information and Culture Minister Lai Mohammed has restated that the federal government is not in any way trying to guard the media. The minister stated this in Lagos at a parley with members of TVC editorial board.
Anybody who runs foul of the Terrorism Act will be punished, whether it's radio, television, newspapers, or social media.
And the United Nations has commended the organizational structure of the Federal Road Safety Corps, describing it as a model for other African countries. The United Nations Secretary General's envoy on road safety, Mr. Jean Todt, gave the commendation at a meeting with the acting secretary to the government of the Federation, Dr. Habibat Lawal, at her office in Abuja.
There is some good in France which you don't have in Nigeria. There is some good in Nigeria which you don't have in France. But for me, the most important thing is the will to achieve something.
Well, that's the news for now. Good morning, Nigeria. We'll be back with Kingsley and Kirian after this break.
From 1967 to 1970, Nigeria went through a horrifying civil war. It didn't matter who was wrong or right. Everybody suffered. Those who fought that war say it should never happen again.
So a lot of people will say, but you were leading the first one. Yes, I led the first one. I don't think a second one is necessary. We should have learned from that first one. Otherwise, the dead would have been to no avail. It would all have been in vain.
The words of our elders are full of wisdom.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
Now to business. Nigeria's consumer price index records its 7th consecutive decline as inflation decreases by 0.05% in July. We now bring you details of this and more on Business News with Joy Uzo.
Welcome to Business News. The Consumer Price Index, CPI, which measures inflation, decreased by 0.05% to 16.05% year-on-year in the month of July 2017 from 16.10% in June. The decrease, as shown in the monthly data released this Monday by the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS, makes it the 7th consecutive decline in the rate of headline year-on-year inflation since January 2017. The Bureau also reported that prices of food commodities continued to increase year-on-year but dropped month-on-month. The report indicates that the rise in the index was caused by increases in prices of bread and cereals, meat, fish, oils and fats, coffee, tea and cocoa, potatoes, yam and other tubers and vegetables. Moving on now, as information communication technology, ICT, continues to drive innovation across sectors, the financial institution, by means of electronic payment system, has recorded growth in cashless transaction volumes due to rising adoption of the alternative payment instruments. The growth has also leveraged on increased financial inclusion, enhanced payments network infrastructure, and regulatory initiatives based on digital payment models. Experts say the payment system plays a very crucial role in any economy, being the channel through which financial resources flow from one segment of the economy to the other. And the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, has launched a major amendment to Nigeria's Code of Corporate Governance for public companies. The code will empower the Commission to sanction companies that fail to comply with its directives. The new amendment is expected to remove the persuasive provision that entitles companies to be put on notice so they could seek redress. This will reinforce the mandatory nature of the code and the authorities of SEC to sanction companies without recourse to notice or redress. A draft of the amendment to the Code of Corporate Governance obtained at the weekend is currently undergoing rule-making process and exposure to stakeholders. Let's take a quick check on how the equities market fared this Monday. And oil markets were roiled on Monday after Hurricane Harvey wreaked havoc along the United States Gulf Coast over the weekend, knocking out numerous refineries and some crude production. Gasoline prices hit 2-year highs as massive floods caused by the storm forced refineries across the U.S. Gulf Coast to shut down. Brent crude, the global oil benchmark, rose as much as 0.8%, reaching as high as $52.84 per barrel. And that's it on Business News. I am Joy Uzo.
All right, thank you very much there, Joy Uzo, for the business package. Next for us, we go over now to the front pages of today's newspapers to check out the headlines.
And newspaper reviewer Bayo Toyabe is here in the studio as always. Bayo, you're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you, Kirian. Good morning. Good morning, Kinsley.
Bayo, pleasure to have you join us.
Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, let's begin by going straight to the front page of this day newspaper, because you have a variety of stories on the front pages of the 5 or so papers that we're taking a look at this morning. This day, from top to bottom, says President says he is pleased with state of economy and inflation dips to 16.05%. Inflation dips to 16.05%. EFCC, that's the kicker. Alice Madueke's extradition must follow due process. That story is in greater detail on page 9. And also there on the front page, Pentagon, that's the U.S. Department of Defense, notifies U.S. Congress of sale of 12 fighter aircraft and other weapons worth $593 million to Nigeria. The Pentagon notifies U.S. Congress of sale of 12 fighter aircraft and other weapons to Nigeria. Now, the lead story, of course, is with a double-decker headline, Buhari weighs options as cabinet reshuffle tops agenda. And the photograph there on the front page shows the president yesterday having a meeting with the Minister of Budget, National Planning, as well as the Minister of Finance, and the Governor of the Central Bank. And in the red cap there is the Chief of Staff to the President.
All right, now let's go over to the blueprint. And below the nameplate of blueprint for this morning, we have some headlines there, beginning from the left-hand side. Federal government declares Friday and Monday public holidays for Salah celebration. The story is on page 13. And there's also this one. We fed on leaves for 3 years, says woman held by Boko Haram. Greater details of that story is on page 5. Then Dizani permanently forfeits another 7.6 billion naira to federal government. Page 15 has details of that story. And the main headline on Blueprint this morning, health workers threaten nationwide showdown over salaries and other matters yet to be resolved. And that's on page 6 of Blueprint. And below that is the photograph of a superintendent of police being decorated for a new rank by the governor of Katsina State and the police officer there. And now below that we are working with U.S. on looted funds, says Vice President Osinbajo. That's on page 6. And on the foot of the Blueprint, we have President Muhammadu Buhari receives briefings, pleased with the economy and the improvements so far recorded. On page 13 of Blueprint, that's where you get details of that story. Then Anambra governorship tussle, although others walk out of PDP primaries. That's page 8. And then at the bottom, Boko Haram, APOB, 8-member U.S. delegation in Nigeria. Get more on that story on page 9 of Blueprint. Bayo.
Thank you. Well, the president was briefed on the state of the monetary policy strategies as well as the state of the economy generally by 3 prominent persons who are responsible for the economy: the governor of the central bank, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Budget and National Planning. And from the briefing, the president expressed satisfaction that the economy is on the upswing. After an overview of the economy and the implementation of 2017 budget, also NBS has come out with a latest rating of the inflation. It is dropped to 16.5%. It will be recalled that inflation had increased up to 17%. And this report is at the July report of the National Bureau of Statistics. So by the time the report for August comes, it's likely to be lower. However, some political parties have taken exception and are challenging that the fact that the economy is improving. But the statistics show otherwise. There has been an increase in the reserve of the nation. There has been accumulation of funds again in the sovereign wealth funds, and the inflation rate is gradually decreasing. Because of the toll the economy has taken, it will take quite a while. But another area of speculation that is there on the pages of the newspaper is the fact that there's a cabinet reshuffle is imminent, and the papers are speculating that that was why there was no cabinet meeting last week. And the proposals are 2. Some are saying an outright change of the cabinet, while some are advocating, the papers are advocating dropping some of the cabinet ministers and bringing on some others. There are also moves allegedly reported by the papers by some of the cabinet ministers making overtures to some governors to ensure that they remain in the cabinet. The other report that has dominated all the paper is the final decision of the Lagos High Court to order a forfeiture of 7.6 billion naira to the federal government. You recall that on August 7th, a temporary forfeiture order was given would notice that it should be published in the newspapers, and after the expiration of 14 days, the court finally ruled that the funds believed to be illicit funds laundered by the erstwhile Minister of Petroleum should be forfeited to the federal government. However, there are one paper particularly did a graphic illustration of the seizures so far. On August 16, properties numbering about 56 were forfeited. These were said to have been acquired between 2011 and 2013. 3 blocks of Banana Island mansion valued at $3.7 million was also around, and rent from that property amounting to $2.4 million and another $84.5 million was also forfeited. The prosecutors in the United States also are following estates which include seizure of a yacht that is valued at about $87 million in New York. In all, in July, July 14, there was a seizure of 50 billion. August 7, there were 2 seizures, 3.7 billion and 84.5 billion. In August 16, 3.3 billion, and August 28, the last one yesterday, 7.6 billion. The total so far is 47.2 billion worth in amount of cash and 487.5 million worth of property. It sounds like a fairy tale in sleaze.
Well, I mean, it's a question that one would ask. Obviously, one of the many questions would be: I mean, if assuming all of this occurred or happened, and the evidence, of course, the court processes will tend to buttress the fact that they happened. Then what time did you have, or did the individual have, to actually face the work of being a minister? I mean, if you were busy acquiring all of this, yes, all of this, as you were saying.
But it has been a tradition over the years, yes, because it was that we're now in an administration that is interested in unearthing what people have been doing in the past. So honestly, it's been there over the years. Yes, and
a corollary to that is that Charles Oputa is leading another group of his and they went to the EFCC office, and they are now protesting that the erstwhile minister should be brought back to face trial. And the secretary of the EFCC, Emmanuel Aremu, said that due process will be followed in the
That's right. And obviously there are accomplices. You know, the way an organization is structured. I mean, it's not that the person individual
just network. It's a network.
Yes, certainly. That's, but I'm sure there will be many more stories that we're going to hear.
These monies are not carried in bag. There are paperwork that led to the looting.
All right. So let's.
The other obstacle, though, is the ability those that are abroad to get repatriated back to the country. You recall that some of the Paris Fund activities that are now coming back was the initiative done during the President Obasanjo tenure, and it takes such a long time to have funds
to get those things. Yes. Yeah, but we have some within jurisdiction, yes, so they will deal with all of those ones. Plus, of course, the outstanding matter of the Osborne Towers money, and then, of course, the one dealing with the IDP and grass cutting issues.
Yes.
All right, let's return to the papers. New Telegraph, very quickly, below, above the nameplate of New Telegraph, it's still on the economy. It says Nigeria's economic progress excites Buhari, and inflation drops to, Telegraph is reporting 16.5 amid food price pressure. Actually, the figure is 16.05, and there's a difference between 0.5, which is half, and then 0.05. Yes. All right, let's go quickly to other headlines below the nameplate. Senator to IGP. This is a matter that we saw yesterday on some of the front pages. Some Senator Misha says there's some ongoing spat there. Details of that can be found on page 7. Flood strips away bride-to-be, months to wedding. That's on page 9. And Sokoto establishes textile factory to boost economy. And Fayose and Olujimi supporters in bloody clash. That's on page 32. Now, we've already discussed Desiani and the matters arising therefrom. Let's go very quickly. You can see the photographs there. Now, these are the scenes out of the flooding in Houston, Texas. You can see all kinds of receptacles are being used as buoys for people to get away from the devastating flood. Of course, there are some reports that the flood levels might, of course, get worsened as the the weather indication shows that there will be more downpour in the area. So this is out of Texas, in the U.S. in particular, in the Houston area. Now, governors to federal government, Southeast and South-South people are suffering. That's on page 3. And scientists uncover breakthrough drug for heart attacks and cancer. That's in greater detail on page 7.
Now I want to see how President Trump is going to react to what happened in Houston, Texas, because he doesn't believe in climate change. And that was why he pulled America, away from the 2015 agreement in France, based on, how to curb, emissions and all of that. And there was a question to him last night in one of the press conferences, where they were asking him which direction does he want to go based on what happened. But because it has not happened there in the past several decades, in France, for instance. And again,
worst that they've
exactly,
had, yes.
Exactly. And many people are suffering.
Yeah, but he is due to visit Texas later today, it is said, with his wife. Yeah. They're due to fly over there. But, of course, we all recall what also happened with Katrina in 2005. That was 12 years ago. Of course, the U.S. has learned a great deal from response to
their response is super.
Two fatalities.
The National Guard has been placed on alert. But talking about the signing the Paris Agreement, the rationale for him not signing it is that up till now, United States still generate a lot of electricity using coal, and the coal contributes substantially to the economy. So he was considering that. That is why there are proponents here in Nigeria too that say we have coal here, we have challenges with power generation, and we should have been circumspect before signing it, because by signing that treaty, it is likely to imperil the contribution of coal to our challenge of power generation.
All right, so Leadership newspaper now, below the nameplate, we have pension liabilities of 20 states hit 200 billion naira. That's another sector in this country where looting has been established, lately. That story is on page 7. Pension liabilities of 20 states hit 200 billion naira. And now the main headline, well, we've read that in other papers, Adoshu, MFLA meet over economy and budget performance. All right, now below that we have Ovia seeks intervention in infrastructure financing, canvasses de-risking. Once again.
I just wanted to talk about one human interest story. Plateau, all of us know to have a temperate climate. It's very cold in Plateau, but it has its consequences. And the newspaper is reporting that there is a challenge there, that most people tend to suffer from ailments that are cold-related, like pneumonia. And one other challenge is that most of the houses are built on rocks. And sometimes they have another challenge with reptiles, snakes, scorpions, and other things. But the danger here is that in these days of mudslinging and landslide, care must be taken to ensure that the people there are highly protected. I recall some years back when I had cause to work in Jos, I always had a water heater because I'm a cold-blooded animal. And I always make sure I run away from Jos between December and January. There was a year, some rivers in Plateau got frozen. It can be that bad. That's right. And I hear even Gembu in Mambila is colder than Jos sometimes.
Tourist attractions, obviously. That's what some Nigerians are spending hard currency to experience. Yes. We also have the Punch newspaper. Some of the stories that we have read from the papers are also there on the Punch. The photographs from out of Texas, they're also there on the front page, the sale of aircraft. But there are other stories below those photographs there. You can see those stories, that is forfeiture there, declaration of holidays, and then of course there's a story that's a matter arising from 1996.
Yes.
Kudira's murder, Lagos false appeal cause rejection of Rogers' testimony. That's Sergeant Rogers. Details of that story can be found on page 11. Now, federal government withdraws, you see the amount there, from the ECA for fuel subsidy. That's the withdrawal of nearly 360 billion naira from the excess crude account for fuel subsidy. That's according to the Fiscal Responsibility Commission. Bayo Atoebi, that's the much that we can take. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
See you tomorrow midweek.
Thank you.
All right, it's Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll be discussing an issue that's been with us for a long while, and how we can then move forward with regard to import substitution and the so-called backward integration.
not a joke. It incites genocide and crimes against humanity. Most of Africa's civil wars are caused by hate speech from one tribe against another. We don't want it here. The Nigerian government stands firm against hate speech.
I was distressed to notice that some of the comments, especially in the social media, have crossed our national red lines by daring to question our collective existence as a nation. This is a step too far.
One nation bound in freedom, peace and unity.
Nigeria, one nation, one people.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
If you are just joining us, you are on to Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. Now to the main business of the day. It is no longer news that Nigerian economy went into recession, but what is paramount is the efforts being made by government to get out of the challenge as soon as possible. Timothy Yusuf reports on some policies meant to revive the economy and boost production.
Over the years, there has been growing concern over Nigeria's dependence on foreign products, including raw materials, for local manufacturing firms which could be outsourced locally. Going down memory lane in the 1970s, the federal government came up with two major policies meant to make Nigerians have some substantial control over production of goods and services. These are the indigenization and the import substitution policies. These policies were said to have made some strides, especially in the automobile and few other sectors, but the successes could not be sustained. The story is the same with other aspects of the nation's manufacturing sector, such as textile, shoe industry, among others. Worried over this development and coupled with the state of the economy, the federal government a couple of years ago introduced measures aimed at enhancing backward integration and import substitution in the country. However, the year 2016 has been a challenging year, obviously with Nigeria falling into a recession. The country had to contend with foreign exchange shortages, thereby giving rise to inflation. As a way to get the economy out of recession and improve production, the federal government lays emphasis on the backward integration and import substitution strategy to unlock the potentials of various sectors of the economy. Experts say backward integration, a practice where companies are encouraged to cultivate their own raw materials by purchasing their suppliers or establishing farms to grow produce for their factories, is beginning to gain momentum in Nigeria following the crash in crude oil prices which started in the fourth quarter of 2014. For instance, a recent report had revealed that if Nigeria's mineral resources were to be used to drive the country's industrialization, the government will stand to earn $25 billion annually by 2025. With other sectors of the economy also lagging behind in the backward integration drive, it is no wonder the present administration has placed so much hope on some products cutting across the minerals and agricultural sectors. Although there are still challenges with meeting factory demand, thereby necessitating importation, experts say it is possible to reduce importation of raw materials by over 50% with genuine desire to key into this initiative. It would be recalled that the country's Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, on the 23rd of June 2016, issued a circular excluding importers of 41 selected goods and services from accessing foreign exchange at the Nigerian official forex markets. While these items are not banned from importation, importers will need to acquire the needed foreign currency to purchase these items from an autonomous market at a higher exchange rate. The initiative was geared towards giving a boost to backward integration and import substitution, which are believed to be capable of creating more job opportunities aside from ensuring self-sufficiency.
All right. right. Thank you very much, Timothy Yusuf, for that background report. Now we have guests with us in the studios here, as well as, of course, our Lagos Network studios. Once we have the connection to the guests there, we shall introduce them. But at least 3 or 4 of them are familiar faces on Good Morning Nigeria. We've always had them when we are discussing trade and economic issues. First, we'd like to, at this time, welcome Professor Ken Ife, who's a development economist as well as a public policy analyst. Professor Ken Ife, I'm delighted to have you join us on the program this morning. Also, we're here with us is a certified international trade practitioner. The last time we spoke to him, he was outside the country. He joined us via Skype, Mr. Femi Boyede. Boyede, pleasure that you are with us on the program this morning.
Thank you very much. Okay. Good morning.
Gentlemen, welcome once again to Good Morning Nigeria. As Kingsley said there, you've been regular personalities in this program, so I believe you're going to do justice to our conversation this morning. And for the purpose of this program, and of course the interest of our viewers who would want to have a better understanding of our topic this morning, let's look at the meaning of backward integration and import substitution. I want to begin with Professor Ken Ife.
Yeah, those two words, they seem interchangeable, but not really, because there are some subtle differences. If you look at import substitution, you take your mind to when we had to use sorghum, introduce sorghum into brewery to replace some of the malt, some of the barley. Then you also look at the use of cassava to replace some of the wheat in the bread and raise from 10 to 20%. But then when you come to backward integration proper, you begin to look at what Dangote did with cement, where we totally removed cement from our agenda and we're now a net exporter of cement. And then also you see also what Innoson is doing on car manufacturing and how the government has now been encouraged to issue 17 licenses to assembly of cars. So, but they tend to be used interchangeably. The fact is that what is the policy environment that would enable us to achieve this much more forcefully? And given the steps that have been taken already, your commentary was that CBN did something on 41 items. But there are more, because on the area of macroeconomic policy, we need to see more in forex support to import of some of the materials that are required for the industries to work. And then there's progress.
All right, Professor Kenny, thanks. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of what we need to do, let's still explore the amplitude of backward integration and import substitution. These are not new terms to us. We've seen them at play in the 70s. We also found a emphasis on the import substitution during the early years of the administration of the regime of General Ibrahim Babangida. We also saw the fiasco that accompanied all of that on account of the deleterious effect of the structural adjustment program. But from a historical perspective, Mr. Femi Boyede, have we always got it right with regard to backward integration and import substitution?
Before you talk about getting it right, I'd like us to also still broaden the understanding of the concept of import substitution and backward integration. I will add another word to the definition of backward integration subsequently. First and foremost, let's look at Nigeria's human capital, because every time we're talking about import substitution, we're talking about raw materials. We neglect the angle of services exports. And it's in services exports really that you really understand the concept of import substitution. The Nigeria Immigration Service grants expatriate quota. The National Authorizing Office, NOTAP, for technology grants license or permit for export of capital gains by foreign companies. In both of these, you are likely to see several hundreds of millions of dollars that have been saved over the years but are not captured in the national economy. MTN came to Nigeria. That's the most ready example, really, when you're talking about services development in Nigeria. And somehow, the very first crop of lawyers that they used were Nigerian lawyers. They could have paid their international lawyers. I don't care now whether they are South Africans or Americans, but it was Nigerian lawyers. most of the accountants, if not all, that MTN uses, and therefore extrapolate this to the other telecommunication firms. The Nigerian lawyers, they could have been foreigners earning not only their salary, but also what they call foreign service allowances. Nigeria, therefore, is not losing the hundreds of millions of dollars that NOTAP would have authorized these companies to pay out. Let's look at why we talk about casualization of labor. It's usually because the companies prefer to give even the menial jobs. And without mentioning any company, some of the problems, issues that Nigerians have with the Chinese companies had or initially was that they import even their labor from China. So let's just have it at the back of our mind. I hope that subsequently we will have enough time to talk about that on this program. But then backward integration, break it down, integrate backwardly. What can we have, what do we have that we are presently importing? That's where, like Prof said, the words are used interchangeably. That's where the interchangeability comes from. So we're saying, okay, Nigeria spends so much on rice. The Economist of London did a massive, report on Nigeria's rice consumption 2 years ago. And because of that, the world's rice capital, Bentonville in the United States of America, decided that they were all rushing to Nigeria to go and start cultivation, production, cleaning of rice to feed the Nigerian population and probably to start exporting from Nigeria. Before anybody knew it, Lagos State, under the present administration, went over to Switzerland and acquired a 32 metric ton per day rice milling plant, which means that when it comes operational, Lagos State is determined to feed Nigeria with rice. Now they are already in collaboration with Kebbi State, they are already producing lake rice. That's what backward integration does. That's what the Dangote group did with rice. That's what they did with pasta. And so before you knew it, Nigeria was comfortable to remove things like spaghetti off the import allowed list. And that's what led to the 41 items that we all believed. And subsequently, read Kingsley, you talked about historically. If you read the World Bank report of 1993, the making of the Asian tigers, the 7 of those Asian countries that actually now became a world example of best practices in economic development actually based the development and growth on the economic policy of backward integration. First, they started with let the wheat grow, let the chaff grow. They closed their eyes to what the multinationals were importing and supported investment in similar goods and pumped a lot of incentives in support. So without actually fighting anybody, attractive to say that you are going out to import. That's the path we should be going.
So, all right, gentlemen, this is a policy matter. I want us to look at where we got it wrong in the first place, because we quickly cited what happened in the 70s, where we had all those assembly plans and other business consortium at the time that really could not be sustained for a very long time. Now it's a policy matter. Now, where did we get it wrong? But over 50 years, we are still talking about backward integration, which the Asian tigers did some 25 years or 30 years ago, which of course they are now enjoying the fruit of that policy. Now, Professor Sifa, where did we get it wrong, number one? And what should we be doing? The present administration seems to be eager, to get Nigeria out of the woods, out of the economic woods we find ourselves.
Anyway, one thing that was very clear over the years is we never had the level of coordination at the policy level, where you have the trade policy, industrial policy, monetary policy, and fiscal policy the same hymn book, so that when you attack a sector, it's sustainable. Now you see, it's unfolding now, especially within the context of the economic recovery and growth plan. You've seen that they're all on the table, and on the 41 items is now being supported heavily. You've seen more physical action on the luxury items. You've seen agriculture take the center stage with intervention funds from the Anchor Borrowers Program. And then you've seen, as you mentioned, Lagos State coming, subnational levels are engaging. So it's no longer a federal business. It involves the states, it involves the private actors, it involves everybody. So there's that level of engagement that wasn't there. So so you have to have policy speak to practice. Then of course there is also the reality that for a macroeconomic stability has to be ensured. You know, the forex has to be made available for you know, you have SME window, you have equal. They have to be made available for. Remember, 80% of our manufacturers are actually importing their raw materials. You couldn't close them down, but you have to wean them off that thing gradually. So they were prioritized on the allocation, and then and while we work on the substitution side of it, as you mentioned, and build capacity, you know, bottom-up capacity, as my colleague mentioned. So there is more orchestration, and there's more coordination, and there's more sustained action, intervention from the CBN in this respect.
That's what we are seeing now, Professor Kenneth. But still, it will be useful for us to back up and have an understanding of why earlier attempts at backward integration and import substitution failed. But of course, we'll come back to you, gentlemen, with us here in the Abuja studios. Let's go over now to our Lagos Network Center, where we have two other guests. Again, they are familiar faces on Good Morning Nigeria. First, we'd like to welcome Mr. Tokwe Fasua. Tokwe Fasua is, you can see there are two of them there. One is in a gray suit, and then the other, of course, is in charcoal gray, I believe, yes. Tokwe Fasua is an economic analyst. His beard is graying this morning. Tokwe Fasua, a pleasure to have you join us. And then we also have Muda Yusuf. Muda Yusuf is the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industries. Gentlemen, a pleasure to have you join us on the program. And straight away with Mr. Muda Yusuf, these familiar concepts, backward integration, import substitution. We saw the efforts in the 1970s. Again, we saw the resurgence of these concepts in the 80s, you know, with the Babangida administration. But still, the fact that our economy remains the way it is, probably, you know, not a middle income, we're still perhaps lower income country, would tend to suggest that we have not had any success or much success with import substitution and backward integration. What went wrong in the past? First, Muda Yusuf.
Thank you very much. I think it's all about the competitiveness of our domestic industries. If we have a policy that encourages backward integration or import substitution, and over the years, the environment has been very, very challenging for those who are in the real sector of the economy. Such policies become very unsustainable. So it boils down to the environment. And you look at what the operating environment is. You look at the cost of production, because the sustainability of any business or any enterprise depends on the competitiveness of that enterprise. In the early 80s, maybe the 70s, of course, the environment, from the point of view, for instance, of financing. If you have a situation where a domestic manufacturing firm is borrowing at 30% interest rate, a situation where government is borrowing at almost 20% interest rates, it is very difficult to have the kind of financing to support the domestic industry to be able to sustain the philosophy of backward integration. Then you have the issue of energy costs. You need energy to drive industrialization. You need energy to make sure that these firms that you are talking about to backward integrate, they need energy to be able to sustain their businesses. Look at what the cost of energy is. Majority of industrial firms, they rely on diesel, they rely on gas, which is also very expensive. They rely on LPFO, which is also not cheap. So energy cost is a very big issue for many industries. Now you have the cost of logistics. We don't have a functioning rail system as we speak. And this country is a very big country. The country is now being serviced essentially transportation. And you know what the state of the roads are. So the cost of logistics is a major problem for firms that also want to backward integrate. I mean, you have industries in Lagos, they have maybe their farms somewhere up north, to move those raw materials from that location to their factories. It's sometimes cheaper to bring products from Asia to Lagos than to bring it from maybe Sokoto or Maiduguri to Lagos. So logistics is a very big issue. And in dealing with all of these issues about import substitution, backward integration, we need to also profile the sectors. We cannot produce everything. We need to identify what sectors in which we have competitive advantage. That is what should guide the emphasis and the drive for backward integration. Clearly, we have competitive advantage in oil and gas. Because if you look at the structure of our imports, 32% of our imports in value is from petroleum products. Another 24% is on industrial raw materials. 18% is on machineries. So altogether, between all these three areas, we are talking about 76% of imports. This should guide the kind of emphasis, the kind of focus we put in place when we are talking about backward integration and self-reliance. So let me stop there and allow others to contribute.
All right, thank you very much. Let's get to Tobe Faswa. Tobe Faswa, you are an economic analyst, and from the submission of Moda Yusuf, there's a great understanding of what went wrong, because he explained the sectors, and issues, logistics, energy, and all of that. But Nigeria had oil boom in the 80s, and that brings me to the issue of policy that we were talking about. I cannot understand a nation where all manner and all brands of products, especially automobile, are imported and there is no assembly plants. The policy did not capture that. In spite of all Moda Yusuf mentioned with respect to energy and what may have been difficulties along the line, that Nigeria would have found a way out of it, because some other industries are still surviving even with all those critical issues he raised. Now I wanted to do an analysis of what actually we ought to have done between 80s and late 90s that would have avoided where we find ourselves today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I think basically what we would have done is what we're trying to do now. Though we're still discussing import substitution and backward integration and so on, I think given the benefit of hindsight and the experiences of other people, other countries, we're now seeing that we could have been bolder, we could have been a lot more resilient in what we do, and we could have taken a broader view of things. As a matter of fact, we're not supposed to be talking about backward integration, import substitution anymore. Things have kind of moved on, and as I think is Professor Ken Ife and Mr. Boyede said here, in Abuja, we can see it from the experiences of other countries, talking about the World Bank report on the Asian tigers and so on, the kind of resilience that they put on the table in order to get where they are. I remember, reading in Joseph Stiglitz's book, Making Globalization Work. And he said, South Korea would have remained a rice producing country till tomorrow if they hadn't been adamant in saying that they wanted to go into technology. And today, South Korea is a technology country. They could have, and as a matter of fact, that's why I actually diverge in terms of, I'm not one of those who believe in comparative advantage. It doesn't work anymore. What we should be looking at is economic sustainability. What is sustainable for you? What do you want to achieve? So now, fine. So backward integration talks about how a company, at the end of the day, how does a company integrate backward to say, okay, do we go and create farms? For example, Dangote has farms now all over the country. So he's not just waiting in his companies in Dansa and Co. Trying to collect from those guys who would supply him. So basically what it does is to say, listen, let me bridge the gap. You can always, so for backward integration is when you go back and say, let's look down the supply chain. How can I get involved in the supply chain to ensure that my supplies come in when they should? Then, of course, there's forward integration when you say, listen, we want to also take control of the dissemination of our goods, for example. Can a company say, listen, I want to get involved in the marketing of my goods rather than just sell to some wholesalers? Forward integration. That's that. Import substitution will be where you say, you look at the items that you import as a country and you say, okay, how can we substitute this? What do we do about the raw materials that we bring from abroad? What do we do about cars, for example? You know, and then you say, let's have a deliberate policy towards substituting that. However, when you hear how all of this is sounding, it doesn't sound quick enough. And it doesn't sound genuine enough for the kind of challenges and for the urgency of now that we are facing in Nigeria. It doesn't sound resilient enough. It doesn't sound sustainable enough, because when you face one direction, there are so many impediments and so many obstacles that can take you off. Now, so we should be talking about economic diversification. And until we understand what economic diversification should be, then we will now be able to get the urgency of the moment that we require. Economic diversification is not about moving from crude oil into solid minerals, for example. It's not about moving from crude oil to say, oh, let's go and start feeding ourselves agriculture, want to export agricultural goods. No. Economic diversification at the end of the day is when you look in the pockets of your people and you say the monies that they are getting paid every month, where do they spend that money? How can we ensure that the money that they are being paid on a monthly basis is spent on Nigerian goods? Then that begins to make it very clear for you what do you have to do at the moment. Then it tells you that there's a whole lot of work. Then it tells you how ridiculous it can be for us to neglect what our people are spending on, for us to even, starting from even the government. It starts with the fiscal policy. And the gentleman who asked me the question, sorry I didn't get your name, sir, you know, he's talked about these issues of car assembly. Well, I support that, you know, companies like PAN, companies like Innocent, they should first of all be drowning in government money. There's no reason why anybody in our government structure should go and buy a Japanese SUV. No, absolutely no reason. Because if you go to America, for example, you would never see an American public official driving a Japanese SUV or a Japanese car. Never. If you go to the UK, they drive Jaguar. They drive the cars, they drive Range Rovers, the cars that they produce. So if we can't produce from the scratch, the ones that are trying, we have to really support them and ensure that we help them to also build capacity. Like, for example, Innocent. Let's build. The other day, CNN came to Innocent, and we saw that a lot of the assembly was being done manually. Fine, you know, but you see, that can't compete with the rest of the world. But the first thing is that Innocent should be the one, and PAN and any other company that comes up should be the one producing for Nigeria, and that has to start with the public sector. If you set that pace in the public sector and understand the reason why you have to spend your money in your country, and that, you know, it's about economic interaction. How well are our economies interacting? At the upper echelon of our economy, and from the middle and upper echelon, are people who, they spend their holidays abroad, they send their children abroad to school, they go for their medicals abroad, they do everything abroad. So that money doesn't percolate down, even as much as we know that that top-down economics doesn't work anymore. Now it's bottom-up economy, because you know, if you give the money to the poor people and you ensure that they're employed and they're engaged, they will still buy the things that the very rich people produce. So I think we need to understand that this discussion is actually about economic diversification, and what does it take to diversify an economy beyond import substitution, beyond backward-forward integration, beyond any strategy. You've got to have a smorgasbord of ideas on the table. You've got to have a kaleidoscope of ideas on the table, and you have to ensure that there's a lot of honesty in making all of those ideas work. What we didn't do in the past was we start we have a kind of tunnel vision. We start and then we stop short, and the rest of the world is moving on, and we've not been able to garner enough strength to insist on the ideas that will make our economy work.
All right, Tokwe, first of all, thank you very much there for your opening salvo. You've said, look, so what we should be talking about is actually economic diversification. Economic diversification, yes, but backward integration and import substitution, these are critical subsets of economic diversification. That's why we are focusing on backward integration and import substitution today. Essentially, that's what our focus is. And still, just to come back again to part of why we would likely encounter some challenges and then how to overcome those challenges. Still with our guests here, back to our guests here rather, in the Abuja studios, Femi Boyde, we were talking earlier about what went wrong. Now, what would be your reaction? Professor Kenike, I would also like you to listen in on this. So the views expressed by some analysts that, look, we're talking about backward integration and import substitution at a time when we didn't grow some very critical subsectors, including the steel sector, for instance. I mean, I'm sure years ago we used to hear of various rolling mills. Where are they today? So to boost your machinery production, whether heavy duty or light machinery, that was one leg of it. At the time, we were also talking about import substitution or backward integration in the 70s and 80s. There seemed to have been no philosophy of value chain mechanism, particularly with regard to value addition to agricultural produce. Those are some of the points that some other persons have talked about with regard to what went wrong. Do you have other points?
Well, I wanted to talk seriously about policy, because that's what everything revolves around. And we have had, if you go into the cabinets of our public officials, you have the best policies in the world, but they are the theories of policy. For any theory to work, it has to be customized to the specific country environment. We're not doing that. I'll start with the example of the National Economic Summit. Prof, I don't remember whether it's 2014 or 2015, where they brought in the keynote speaker from Georgia. The man came and centered his presentation, and every intervention that he had during the 3 days was around zero budgeting. Nobody took the pains to understand what zero budgeting was as a creation of the state of Georgia. The conclusion that everybody went with was, oh, Nigeria is going to start zero budgeting. So every MDA went back to their offices to go and start zero budgeting. And so you hear zero budgeting everywhere, zero budgeting everywhere. What is zero budgeting? How is it relevant to Nigeria? And if we must do it, how do we localize it, adapt it to the Nigeria environment? Just an example, policy issue. The biggest of them all that confronts Nigeria is implementation and execution of policy. I'm very sure that the people who included policy somersault in their Investopedia or in their respective dictionaries picked it from Nigeria. Because it is in Nigeria that you have mid-year review of fiscal policy. For a manufacturing company to actually exist and be sustainable, like Tokwe said, you need a minimum of 5 years predictable, unchanging, and sustainable policy. But we have a fiscal policy in January, by the way, 2017 fiscal policy. 2017, I mean, fiscal policy is yet to be released. That people are supposed to have planned against in January, knowing that Nigeria has only a 12-month planning cycle. So let me not dwell too much on that now. I have quite a few. No, I've left budgeting. Yeah. Now, let's talk about how Nigerian companies, public agencies actually interact among themselves. The vice president, in his very first public appearance on the economy, sometime, I can't remember the date, in Transcorp Hilton, warned all the ministries, departments, and agencies they must put a stop to silo mentality. You have 10 different government agencies budgeting for and securing approval to run the same program. And you have government agencies refusing to understand the very, very structures that can drive the economy. And so somebody sits down. I was in a meeting 3 administrations or 4 ago where 6 ministers actually came with the respective ideas of how to implement industrial incentive in Nigeria. And one assistant controller general of custom, after listening to all of them, said, I will not allow that to happen. And I asked, as the independent observer consultant on that meeting, who are you when the ministers of the Federal Republic and the Secretary to the Government of Federation, as the chairman of that committee, is listening and taking notes? You are saying I. That's what we still have in Nigeria as of today. Those are the things that went wrong, that are going wrong. We have a presidential committee on trade malpractice. I have not seen any document in Nigeria that says trade practice in Nigeria is 1, 2, 3. So it comes back to what I said earlier sometime on this program. We have promotion to the detriment of development.
Like trade promotion.
Even industrial promotion, even policy promotion. I'm using the word promotion now. So you go ahead and begin to say, oh, we don't want this to happen. What do you want to happen? Have you said it? Have you set it? Do people understand that to backward integrate, this is what they must do? That is what the issue of having too many agencies without a clearinghouse. My final comment on this. Countries that are making it, they are singing from the same hymn book. We have a Nigeria Investment Promotion Commission. That agency has more than enough work. It should not be talking about promoting incentives. It shouldn't be doing road shows. It should now look inward and become the clearinghouse of Nigeria's policies, including backward integration and import substitution, such that every agency submits in there, and then they have a potpourri and come out with a unified policy.
Thank you.
That's where we get it right.
Thank you very much. Thank you indeed. Our public analyst Femi Boyede, thank you indeed. And as you were speaking, we were just being joined by Ezenwa Anumuno, the legal practitioner, who has just joined us. Thank you for joining us. Good morning, Nigeria. Well, the next person is coming to you. I hope you listened to some of our guests, who have been making some points here. Tobe Faso highlighted the issue of public officers being the key implementers of government policies. We have also talked about policy that has not been adhered to or properly implemented to the latter, to ensure that the reason for which such policies are made are realized in the long run. Now, the legal practitioner here, tell us about your feeling about the entire situation, where policies are made not properly implemented. Do we require any legal, any legal aspect of it that would be necessary to ensure that policies are properly implemented, to ensure that we get out of our current economic situation?
Thank you very much. Good morning, viewers. I agree with the previous speakers with all they have said about the challenges with backward integration and local content development and all that. But there is one aspect I would like us to take a look at, and is the aspect of backward linkages. How do we link one aspect of the economy to the other? And that's where the issue of the legal framework, a solid legal framework, comes in. You asked questions about what are the challenges, where did we miss it? And because the legal framework, the requisite legal framework is not properly in place, that is the missing link. And I'll give you an example. What we call Local Content Act that governs the oil and gas industry has copious provisions as to giving preference to Nigerian locally made goods and services. And it even has a provision for instance, for insurance. it has a provision for legal practitioners that you must source those ones locally. Now, what does that do for us? That gives you a legal framework to link one aspect of the sector of the economy, say the oil and gas sector, to the insurance sector. It also has a provision for the banking. And it also has, like I said earlier, provision for legal practitioners. Now, if you link those, you remove it from being an enclave economy in the oil and gas to other sectors, and it engenders development of other sectors. Now, for instance, legal practice sector. In UK, the legal services create about 400,000 jobs, the second highest provider of employment in the United Kingdom. If this free legal framework, like we have in the oil and gas, is also reproduced, say, in the construction industry, in the power sector, and you link one sector to another, it will engender diversification of economic activities. And that is the first point. That is where we have missed it. If we have the requisite laws in place that will link us from one sector to another, I'm sure that it's not only a sector that will be developed. We'll move from one sector to another, and you see that there will be a general development of Nigerian economy.
So there were legal frameworks that established, because we said that we derailed at a point in time. Like in the 70s, this backward integration was properly established. Yeah. We were saying that we derailed at a point. So what about the legal frameworks that established, those policies then that were properly implemented?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, the legal framework must be a deliberate act or action. You must have laws in place. Like I gave you example, the Nigerian Content Development, Oil and Gas Content Development Act, that was 2010. I can give you an example. There's a Procurement Act. There's a provision where you give preference to Nigerian suppliers of goods and services. Like the Cabotage Act, there's a provision where you have that ships and vessels must be used, Nigerian-made and Nigerian-registered ships and vessels must be used. I'm not sure.
50-50. 40-60.
Yes.
40-60.
Thank you, Dr. Ken. I'm not sure that those frameworks were there in place. And if they were there in place, what about the implementation? So we must look at the framework first. Maybe it was a policy, like has been alluded to earlier on. There are policies for local government and local content development, backward integration, but until you put it in the proper perspective of a legal framework, we might not have a sustainable development in that regard. So I still feel that the legal framework is a missing link. We must diversify this to other sectors of the economy, and then we can aggregate the benefits. Until we do that, we might still continue struggling like we've done over the last few years.
Last few years or decades?
Last few decades. Yeah.
Well, all right. That's SN1 no legal practitioner. Thank you very much for your comments. Of course, we also thank the other guests and then those who have sent in their reactions by way of tweets. We'll take a short break now. When we come back from this break, we'll take the tweets and then continue with the conversation.
If you hear a bomb explosion or gunshots of an active shooter, that might be a terror attack. At such times, always remember 3 action words: run, hide, report. Don't try to run towards the terror scene to save the situation, because there might be a second bomb blast or another attack. Run far away and take cover. Make sure you are safe first. Yes, it is in our nature to sympathize over the hurt, but remember, only trained personnel can help in such situations. When in a secured environment, promptly call relevant authorities and help will come. For anonymous reporting, call 09630-3250-5 or 0813-2222-106. If you see something, say something. Nigeria unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
right, you're welcome back. And it's still Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live on the network service of Africa's largest television network, the Nigerian Television Authority. Let's take our viewer reactions now. The first tweet we have in here is from Dele Jack Solomon, one of our regular contributors. Now he says, there is need to take full advantage of our agric potentials in order to preserve our dwindling resources, enrich local farmers, and boost industries.
And a change to progress, no pain, no gain. Let's build real local economy, which is what present government, with their will, has shown that it is possible within 2 years.
And we have this from Shaneze Esang, says, any society that is serious about industrialization, yet downplays the importance of R&D, that's research and development, being the hallmark of technological development, is, according to him, delusional.
Cecilia Okoroma, raw materials are bound all over Nigeria. The problem is we all want shine life. Everybody wants to be a leader, not a digger.
Sonny Michael Omakoji. Now, this is not the first time we are embarking on this policy. However, we hope that there is a political will to make it work this time around.
Now, heavy tariffs from Festus Akimboewa, heavy tariffs on imported goods is a good start, but will be ineffective if there is no effort to keep the price of locally produced goods low.
Still another word from Festus says Nigeria has the potential to be economically buoyant, and backward integration can unlock that potential. And focus should be on agric for food and raw materials.
And Dele Jack Solomon, he says the CBN policies help us to realize that there is a big possibility to start expanding. We hope the policies stay because it is imperative for us.
Akins Dada tweets that there should be some statutory impetus and empowerment of the people, infrastructural and value chain developments, as well as capacity building. Now, those are some of the tweets that we're taking in the meantime. Let's return to our guest, Professor Kenife. Of course, you've listened to the wide-ranging opinions expressed by the other guests, and so we can have some consensus or understanding of what's going on. But with regard to backward integration and import substitution, let's see, earlier when you were explaining what is meant by the two analogous terms that are also used interchangeably, you did say, see, we had, for instance, a policy to diminish the input of wheat and then increase the input of cassava. It wasn't the first time that we were having that. And then sorghum, we also had that XYZ. Now, what has been, from your perspective, the way we have tended to also respond to external stimuli with regard to new buzzwords or new concepts? But we'll tell you globalization. In an era of globalization, a company will source its materials. If it's an MNC, that's a multinational corporation, it will source its materials from anywhere and so on and so forth. The law of comparative advantage no longer holds. And we seem to be swimming in a sea of ideas that sometimes, we get drowned. So how do we begin to have, shall we say, a pure national identity with regard to our policies, bearing in mind our national interest with regard to the miasma of ideas that we have floating around there, globalization, comparative advantage, or otherwise?
Globalization will not go away. But I listened to the two views, divergent views from Lagos, and I think there is a middle way. Muda was very right, actually, that we need to focus on comparative advantage and then identified all the infrastructure constraints and, in fact, the cost of capital. But on the other hand, Fasuwa knows what he's saying, because he says that economic diversification should be the agenda. Of course, what we are discussing is a subset of that. But let me come in, because you've gone to agriculture. Agriculture is our native, latent comparative advantage. And let's begin with FAO identified 5 countries in the world that actually produce more food than they require. Nigeria is one of them, and the only one in Africa. So empirically, we actually produce twice more food than we require as a country. But the challenge is that 30 to 70% of what we produce never make it into the food chain. And it's all about post-harvest losses. And of course, you have transportation infrastructure, weak infrastructure, all of that. So, we got that. And it has actually, do you know that we faced food security challenge just because of the drop in the foreign exchange, the devaluation. The devaluation forced the price of good food to go down, and our grains were going to Mali, to Niger, and to Burkina Faso. So you saw apparent scarcity. It was because the cost was now lower. Franc CFA was 3 francs CFA to Naira, but it came down to 1.7. So our goods were like 50% cheaper, and they were all living the grace we are living. So we saw the impact on inflation. Inflation was going up. Food cost was central to that. Yes. But the fact remains is that we have to cultivate, we have to be strong on agriculture, because 70% of the workforce is in agriculture. So employment, it has the potential to engage a lot of people. But let's stop calling farming and call agribusiness, so that your youth can engage with the agenda. So what is different now is that CBN happened to have a space, and it quickly filled that space. It stopped using its own money. It didn't ban. It stopped the hemorrhage of 41 items. And if you take only 5 of these items, sugar, rice, wheat, fish, they take 1.3 trillion of import bill. So attacking those and bringing in a program that we know ought to have been in place many decades ago. Now make sure that our growers program, we are actually meeting our subsistence structure. Where over 90% of our farmers are in the subsistence structure. You're actually meeting them with a program that enables you to engage them and integrate them into a global supply chain. Now, so Dangote is doing this. The guys in the rice, they're all doing that now. They're making sure that they come to our farmers where they are. And whether it's 0.5 hectare or 1 hectare, they are all included in a supply chain platform that integrates them to. So there is something going on now that we need to support. Obviously, for you to in 12 months produce 2 million metric tons of rice, tends to suggest in the next 2 years, we actually will keep, in fact, the target is 2018, we will reverse the import of rice. The target is in 2019, 2020, the same will happen to wheat. So it is important that we focus on this and then make sure that at least our population that is going to double by 2030 is going to be fed, and we're not going to have nutritional challenges. And then at the same time, it provides the raw materials for the industries. It's difficult. There are still some agricultural industries that are importing some raw materials, but you can't stop that because of employment. You can't stop. There are things you couldn't stop. But I want to finally say that you mustn't forget that there are other economies that are not only throwing in substandard goods to you, but are also subsidizing their own economy to undermine your economy.
Yeah, dumping.
Dumping, yes. I gave an example of EU spending 75 billion euro to subsidize agriculture. You wouldn't have expected that agriculture would take that subsidy, but that is it. And we now have to fight with our poor infrastructure, with our high cost of finance, with our low power. All of those, we are still having to contain.
Well, Professor Kenny, thanks a lot. I mean, you raised another issue now. That's why, in prefacing my question, I was talking about how we respond to external stimuli, including, of course, all kinds of ideas from very well-known global financial institutions, some of which say that subsidy is inefficient, in terms of managing the economy. But we have examples from elsewhere. Let's go back to our Lagos Network studios. You saw the two gentlemen back on the screen again. My question is going to Muda Yusuf, DG of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. With regard to backward integration, import substitution, again, some persons would complain about the role of multinational corporations who sometimes, tend to be big players in the economy, that at some point, some of the policies that we saw in the 1980s were actually frustrated by a number of these multinational corporations. They would tell you this is what they are going to do. Femi Boyede here was talking earlier about the service export and so on and so forth, expatriate quota, but we are seeing how a number of the multinational corporations have at the top echelons, expatriates who, of course, are paid in hard currency, and then you have capital flight out of the system. How can the MNCs, that's multinational corporations, be brought into this so that at the end of the day, whether they are in the food and beverage industry or wherever they are, that at some point that they recognize, we'll be mentioning the name of Dangote, but Dangote is only one player among several others, for instance, in the food and beverage industry.
Well, I think it's a question of institutional capacity. Because if a government has a policy all players in the economy have a responsibility to operate in line with that policy. And this also underscores the need for policies to be consistent. Because I know that many investors, including even some multinationals, have also lost investments because policies were not consistent. If we are firm in the way we conduct our policies and we craft policies in a way that are sustainable, I'm sure every player in the economy will fall in line. Whether it's an indigenous company, whether it is a foreign company or a multinational, everybody will fall in line. So it's a question of the capacity to ensure that the policies are right, and capacity to ensure that policies are consistent, and capacity to ensure that we will sustain these policies. And having said that, I want to underscore the point that policies determine the behavior of operators in the economy. Institutions also determine the behavior of players in the economy. So we need to get policies right. We need to get our institutions right. Now, talking about policy, because all of this you can only achieve if you have the right kind of policy. First, monetary policy. The monetary policy must be such that can drive this kind of aspiration. We drive domestic investment at 30% interest rate. That is key. Secondly, our foreign exchange policy also needs to be in alignment with this aspiration. Earlier, you were talking about where we missed it. One of the critical areas where we missed this self-reliance agenda is our over-concentration on ensuring that we have a strong currency. The Asian tigers and Asian economies that Femi Boyede was referring to, if you look at the way they have operated the economy, they never at any point in their history emphasized too much strength for their domestic currency. And that encourages their export competitiveness, and it also inherently discourages imports. You achieve more with the right kind of foreign exchange policy than even tariffs or changing smugglers up and down. We missed it because at the time when we had a lot of foreign exchange, we had oil boom, we threw everything into the foreign exchange market, rather than use it to build the capacity of the economy to be competitive. And it encourages a lot of imports because imports became cheaper. So our foreign exchange policy must be such that it's in alignment with this policy. Then our trade policy is also very critical. We should know what we should allow in, what we should not allow in, at what tariff, what kind of import restriction, what kind of import duty. These things are key to ensuring that we have a sustainable industrial sector. Then we talk about procurement policy. This has been alluded to by some of the speakers earlier. We need to structure our procurement policy in a way that will support the dream of backward integration and import substitution. Of course, we have some of this already in the Procurement Act, but implementation is also an issue. It's one thing to have these things in your legislation. It's another thing for you to get this thing done. Then there is the tax policy. There is too much emphasis of our tax policy on just generating revenue. You need to structure the tax policy in a way that will also incentivize specific sectors of the economy. We have identified our agro-allied sector. We have identified some aspects of the services sector. What kind of tax policy do you put in place to ensure that these sectors are competitive? So policies have a big role to play in all of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Policy indeed has a role to play because you all have agreed at the beginning of this program that it's a matter of policy and policy implementation. Now, you talked about comparative advantage in the past, Muda Yusuf, but the man next to you said that comparative advantage, that FASWA, he said the competitive advantage no longer holds now because of the level development has gone globally. Now, gentlemen, we may be having this conversation peripherally, you know, without really hitting some of very crucial aspect of development, which is technology. And I want to go to FASWA because he spoke in that direction a short while ago. Now, here is a nation that we're talking about fiscal policy, we're talking about monetary policy, we're talking about technology. All the countries we all made references to are big-time technology-based economies. And all the sectors of the economy are driven by technology. And we have always been importing technology all our lives as a nation, and no policy has been articulated and has interest in technology, because even agriculture, is it automobile, everything is driven by technology. So I want to ask you, Francois, how did we miss this track technology-wise, and what should Nigeria do to step up, in the area of growing indigenous technology to drive all these sectors that we've been discussing this morning?
Very much once more. The first industrial revolution was driven by steam. The second industrial revolution was driven by electricity. And if you look at the industrial revolutions, for every revolution that comes, there's a boost in productivity and in the production of goods and services. However, it was also growing in line with globalization. From one industrial revolution to the other, there's a lot more people being involved in the world. However, what we also realized was that the world is moving from a position where a lot of people are going to factories to produce for a lot of people. We're now getting to a position where few people using technology are providing goods and services for so many people. As a matter of fact, we're moving to the point where fewer and fewer people using technology are producing goods and services for only those who can afford it. And therefore, a lot of people are dropping by the wayside. Professor Ken Ife mentioned the fact that Nigeria is one of the highest food producers in Africa. I mean, it is perhaps the highest food producer. And then I begin to wonder, why are we still talking about poverty, food poverty? Food poverty among maybe 60% of our population. All right, so the third industrial revolution was driven by the internet. And we're in the fourth industrial revolution now. And this is driven by alternative intelligence. It's driven by robots. We're now in an era where, we're talking about sustainability. We're talking about green energy. We're talking about an era where people are going to be using very little to produce so much. We're talking about the era where, in an era where, the very smart companies run by teenagers from the other side of the world who take money from the pockets of billions of people around the world, even when you sleep. You paid money to them this night, perhaps you didn't know. There were updates that were going on your phone. Someone takes part of your airtime, or what we call data here. And we don't know, nobody is articulate enough to say, okay, how much went to Google? How much went to Facebook? How much went to Twitter? They take it little amounts of money. And so this is the kind of era that we're living in now. So now the problem we have on ground is really endemic and is historical, because at no point in time did we have the capacity to compete on technology, and we haven't actually done that much. We haven't, like I said earlier, the challenge we have, we should not think it's easy, number one. Number two, development is consistency. In order to achieve anything, you've got to stick to it, you've got to run it, you've got to ensure that human factor is removed as much as possible. A few of our gentlemen here this morning have talked about the policy issues. Policies are critical. The legal frameworks are critical. Well, what we have seen in Nigeria is that the human beings don't let these policies work. So the moment you begin to bend the rules for yourself and for people who you know, and culture comes in and all sorts of things come in, is a church member, is a mosque member, and all of that, then the policies collapse. As a matter of fact, we have fantastic policies in this country as we speak. I'm privy to an IMF tax report, which was done this month at the behest of the Minister of Finance. And if you look at that report, it's a bulky report, but if you look at that report, talking about how we can raise taxes and run the economy and all of that, you see that there are many. In fact, one of the things they said was that every policy that they had made in the past was never disseminated to the MDAs. And when they came back, of course, everybody is doing whatever they want. Of course, I'm not a particular supporter of the policies of IMF and World Bank and all of that. Because what I could see was, they are very intelligent people, but the policies we should be making ourselves. Are we truthful enough? I mean, and now look at where we are today. Okay, from a sociological perspective, we're now in an era where the champions in our society are people who are trying to pull the society apart. Let us go this way. We want to go on our own. And those are the people we hail. So to a large extent, yes, policy is great. Legal, legal frameworks are fantastic. What we haven't got in touch with is ourselves. If we can now get in touch with ourselves, we now understand that development is consistency. We now say, listen, you can't do all of this without this technology that you're talking about. Now, how do we get the technology? What is the handshake between the town and the gown? How much input are our professors having in the universities and the polytechnics and so on into what's going on in society? So if we're not actually mapping these, and a lot of times we are very great at organizing seminars and people come and say the right things and so on, but we should understand what I said earlier on about the urgency of now, just how far gone we are. And the leakages that are still going on in the system, and said by Ezenwa also mentioned something like that. The leakages going on in the system, there's the time to stop it is now. In terms of building the technology, let's think small. We are now living in a world where 18-year-old people create apps, what's called applications. And applications are things that solve problems. And Nigeria is the place where we have a lot of problems. How come our own teenagers and our own youngsters and our own university undergraduates are not the ones creating the apps? All right? So those are the kind of things that we should be thinking about. Let's think small in terms of starting this technology. Let's begin to think in terms of the problems we have and deploy our thinking towards that. And however, when we're going to do that, let's be ready to go the long haul. It's not going to be a 100 meters dash. All of our policies in the past have been 100 meters dash, after which, people come in, personalities come in and truncates the process.
All right, thank you very much indeed once again. Still on this technology aspect, of our conversation, and I'm going to the barrister now. We had a technology expo some months ago in this country where universities, private laboratories actually came up with what they can do, research findings that have never found their way on the floors of the manufacturing sector, because of what we're talking about, policy, laws, and all of that. Now, let me paint this scenario for you. I was in China when we launched the two communication satellites. The first had issues. The second one is about 8 years plus now in the orbit. And Nigerian government agencies are not linking up to that NASHCOM site. These are own satellites. And it has the same capacity and capability like other satellites across the globe, because it was launched by an internationally acclaimed company that launches satellites into the orbit, that launched over 100 satellites. The reason given by an official is that it doesn't have a backup. Which now means that if you buy a new car, you aren't going to drive that car until you get a second car. Now, China started with one satellite. Today, they have over 130 in the orbit. Because satellite is a huge international business that can give you money more than oil and gas. And we are not even the one that we have. It will live itself here about 15 years now, but it has done 8 years. Now, how come the GSM operators in Nigeria are not hooking up to that? And even broadcast establishments in this country are not hooking up to that. We're looking at backwards integration. We're looking at substitution of importation. Now, the question is should there be laws that should back this up? Before government could say, okay, fine, especially like in China or America, you cannot have a GSM operating establishment without linking up to their own indigenously made, satellite. Now, what does law have to do here?
Okay, thank you very much. When you spoke about the satellites, or when you were giving the narration, I felt it was a huge tragedy. It's a huge tragedy that we are not making use of what we have. But having said that, I think we need to have a national ICT plan. I don't know if a national ICT plan is in place. I should believe that we have agencies that should articulate that, and that should be the NIGDA, the National Information Technology Development Agency. There must be a national ICT plan that stipulates that so and so should be linked to so and so. Then people will come and file in. If, in the absence of that, we'll have agencies in their small enclaves doing whatever they want, linking up to different foreign satellites and so on and so forth. Having said that, it's also under the issue of technology that you raised. How do we aggregate the benefits of technology in this issue of backward integration? A few weeks ago, the Vice President of Nigeria, when he was acting president, signed into law an executive order on local content. And the idea was to encourage ministries, departments, and agencies to patronize local manufacturer of goods and services. And I went through the list and I saw things like uniforms and footwear, I saw motor vehicles, I saw construction materials, but there was no deliberate reference to something like, there was ICT, but there was no deliberate reference to something like innovation. You look at where the world is going to today. The richest people in the world are people that innovate. We must have a policy to grow innovation, taking it further from technology. If we grow innovation, then we can be competitive. You go outside, you see the what is happening in the computer village. You have a whole lot of talent. How do we aggregate these people and bring them into the system so that they can scale it up? How do you scale it up? That's where you need the necessary framework to make sure that what they are doing in that small computer village, you can bring it and scale it up. When you scale it up, you become competitive. So these are the things that are missing.
Anomono, thank you very much. We're on the home stretch of our conversation right now. We still have a set of twists to take very quickly, and then we pop the last question with regard to what we need to do in specific terms. We're talking about ICT a moment ago. Dele Jack Solomon has this tweet. It says, my moderators, with our large deposits of minerals and raw materials like cocoa, rubber, iron ore, coal, and animal skins, among others, there is no reason why the local manufacturer industries shouldn't generate much of their raw materials locally. We can also improve on the quality of products.
Now, Mike Anyako says, for us to attain self-sustainability, the government should ban all imports in the country. There's no viable alternative to this option.
Now, Sunday Michael Amakoji has another tweet. Now, this policy should mark the era of value chain and building capacity, paying attention to infrastructure and holistic industrialization.
Now, Cecilia Koroma, dig to recover the so much God-endowed outfit. Research centers must be funded so lecturers can research and not be handout sellers.
All right, now those are the twists that we have. Just to get the last comments of our guest, Mr. Femi Boyede, there was a comment made by Muda Yusuf from Lagos when it was, indicating what the causes of bleeding are in terms of forex outgoings. He said, look, which is advisable for us to profile the sectors. And he said 32% of our forex outgoings meant for importation of refined petroleum products, some 24% industrial raw materials, 18% on machineries. In terms of import substitution or backward integration, 32% oil and gas, 24% industrial raw materials. What can we begin to do in terms of sector-specific interventions in seeking to use policy to drive backward integration or import substitution mechanisms in these areas? Very quickly.
Thank you very much, Kingsley. I'm very sure that I won't have enough time to answer this question. But let me just start. The Federal Ministry of Finance has made it very clear that any waiver, concession, or incentive or support mechanism that Nigeria is going to offer now will no longer be to a company. It's going to be sector-specific. So, in practice, we have a government that understands sectorization and the need to develop sectors rather than companies.
Yes.
But that's how far that they have gone. We still come back to the same problem. There's a plethora, a proliferation of ideas that are just hanging in the air. We still remember very well, how many times did the CBN consult Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry before they introduced monetary policies, foreign exchange policies that were later reversed after the people that they should have consulted in the first instance started reacting? It's still the same silo mentality. We talk about absence of laws. No, there are laws. The Export Expansion Grant is established by an act of parliament, Cap 118. But it has been somersaulted 14 times in the past 5 years. 2.5 years up till today, Export Expansion Grant is not there. And when it is now being introduced, the act itself has not been modified. So we are flouting our own rules. I know you don't have time. You are looking at me already. Let me quickly talk about how we need to do this. What is happening to economic management team? Where are the platforms or public-private dialogue? What is the nucleus? I think if I remember, I feel biology, but nucleus is the epicenter. What is the epicenter of Nigeria's economic drive? Obama Export Initiative operated because there was a cabinet committee. Where is the cabinet committee? I will ask the last question.
These are questions for another day.
I know. One administration in the past had the office of the special advisor to the president on informal sector. Isn't informal sector a bigger economy than the economy that we know?
You're right.
Thanks. Professor Conniff.
That's what I was saying.
Yes. But I think the key, what is missing.
Profiling the sectors and what to intervene.
Yes. We have a plan, and I can tell you that is a robust plan. This economic recovery and growth plan is a robust plan. Let us walk through that plan for 1 minute, because we create plans and we never work with these plans. Let's work with these plans, but bear in mind that circumstances have changed to the point where we must keep in view trade defense mechanisms, safeguard measures, infant industry protection measures, because rather than say import substitution, banning this, banning that, red flag goes up at WTO. But when you say infant industry protection, everybody does the same in different ways. When you talk about intellectual property protection, like an Hollywood, everybody does the same. So you use this within the ambit of the WTO rules, within the ambit of the common external tariff of ECOWAS.
Thank you,
we use
Prof.
levy instruments. We don't arbitrarily increase.
Thank you, Prof. At this point, we need to round off this conversation. It's been so well handled. We thank you, all of you, indeed. But first of all, let me begin with Professor Ken Ife, development economist and public policy analyst. Well, thank you for your insight in today's edition of the program. And Femi Boyede, certified international trade practitioner, professional. Good to have you on the show this morning.
Thank you very much.
And Ezenwa Anomolo, the legal practitioner, it's been a pleasure talking with you this morning.
Thank you very much.
All right. Of course, we had two final comments from Abuja studios here. Now, for us to close, let's go quickly to Muda Yusuf. Muda Yusuf of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. With regard to the sectors that you profiled, what can we do to ramp up the goal of backward integration or import substitution with regard to those key sectors? Very quickly.
I will just, at the risk of repeating myself, say that we need to deploy the combination of all the policies that I mentioned earlier: monetary policy, trade policy, tax policy, investment policy, and all the rest, to ensure that we target these sectors. Because the beauty of profiling the sectors is to know where we can get the best value for the economy. We should be looking more at sectors that have high local value addition. That is where you can get the kind of jobs you want to create. That is where you can get the kind of income you want to generate. That is where you can generate what you call multiplier effect for the economy. So that is very key. We have to identify those sectors. I mentioned them earlier: agro-allied sector, we have the solid mineral sector, we have the oil and gas, and the services sector. So if you look at those sectors, we deploy policies and ensure that those policies are geared towards driving the growth and sustainability of those sectors.
All right, that's Mr. Muda Yusuf. We would like to appreciate you. We also like to appreciate Tokwe Faswa. He's an economic analyst. He joined us from our Lagos Network studios. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us on the program this morning. Okay, now let's go on now to our complimentary segments. We take sports.
It was a promise made and promise kept for the Sam Vincent's